Fey and tabletop role-playing games are a lot like chili. There's a lot that could be put under the label of chili, and we will all at least grudgingly accept it as chili, so long as it is a stew with chili pepper in it. And the same thing could be said of the Fey. You could take your inspiration from Greek, Slavic, Celtic myth. You could even go so far as to take the Japanese Kadema and Tanuki and say that they're Fey and not be too far off the mark for someone to say, sure. Because somewhere in there is a spice that allows us to recognize and say, that's a Fey, but that is not. Hi, I'm James, and on this channel I talk about the things that I think about, plan and plot for my tabletop role-playing games. And this week is Monster Week, brought to us by Ginny D and Pointy Hat. And this year, it's the pixies, the dryads, the nymphs, the treants, the goblins, the witches, the boggarts, and all those other things that we might look at and go, yeah, I think that's a Fey. I think it's less about what the stat block says at the top is an archfey and more to do with how they feel when you're talking to them. And I know that's weird coming from me. I don't really do vibes. I like design that allows me to make dice feel like you're having a nail-biting fight with a dragon. And while the dice and the math are useful when you decide to stab my dragon, it is still up to me to make a conversation with that ancient red dragon to feel like it's cut from the same cloth as Smog, or to feel like the Fey that you're talking to is Titania. Fey are often portrayed as us, humans, dialed up to 11.
These go to 11.
They are more tied to nature, the arts, magic, and the end result feels right to me, but doesn't speak to the reason, the motivation. And I need that motivation if I'm going to be able to improvise a conversation between my players and Mab, Queen of Air and Darkness. I need to know what drives her that would be familiar to a human, but also different than a human. In The Wise Men's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, the antagonist, quote, describes the relationship between humans and Fey as a relationship between water and alcohol. In equal glasses, they look the same. Both liquid, both clear, both wet after a fashion, but one will burn, the other will not. This has nothing to do with temperature or timing. These two things behave differently because they are profoundly, fundamentally not the same. The same is true with humans and Fey. We forget it at our peril. When you think of Fey and TTRPGs, you're probably thinking of one of two kind of fuzzy categories. There are the naturalists, the satyrs, the pixies, the dryads, the nymphs, the bullywogs. If I was going to put Rizulka, Kodema, and Leshy in as Fey, this category would be my justification. There's a part of me that looks at D&D lore and says, you took the centaur from Greek mythology and called that a Fey, but the Sphinx isn't? Care to explain? But these are games, not mythology courses, and I am willing to put up with them being inspired by and not trying to replicate. These beings don't just live in an environment, they are tied to it in a way that human beings just no longer are. If a forest fire breaks out near a human village, they can flee, they can return, they can replant, they can rebuild. The treants, the dryads, the Kadema, they're doomed. They're going to die. Human beings from any part of the world can go to a completely different environment, and given time and tools, we will find a way to adapt, survive, and exploit. The Fey cannot. They are tied to their environment so tightly that the smallest change, stepping on a flower, cutting down a single tree, might be a death sentence. And then there are the courts, winter and summer, seelie and unseelie. These are our politics, with all the intrigue and rules of etiquette that comes with them, but more treacherous. These are the Fey that make deals, trade favors, hand out blessings and curses, and twist language into knots. They're the source of the reputation for the Fey for never technically lying, but not telling the whole truth, finding every loophole in a promise. A classic example is answering, "Can I have your name, please?" only to realize you gave way more than you thought when everyone you ever met no longer has any recollection of you because your identity is in somebody else's pocket. A lot of this kind of idea comes from Celtic and Slavic myth, and then William Shakespeare, and maybe a dash of Norse mythology thrown in for good measure. I personally think I sniff a little bit of kind of fairy tale warning in there. Beware nobles, they may look fancy, but they tell lies wrapped up in truth. You know, like politicians and lawyers. But I could be projecting. If you can play these well, these will be some of your players' favorite moments and characters to interact with, and it is really rewarding and very challenging. You need to make them feel familiar in a kind of collective memory way, but that memory remembers that they are not us. That may look like water, but it burns. Whenever I need to play something that's not human, I go back to the same starting point. What makes humans what we are? We all share certain basic physiological needs, not wants. We need air, food, water, and shelter. Without those needs taken care of, we will do barbaric things to one another to make sure those needs are met. Only slightly less important is something like safety. We don't want to feel unsafe, but if the choice is between starvation and being unsafe, we will choose being unsafe. That's why we'll go hunt a mammoth or whatever. That structure comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is our structure. What is the structure for a Fey? What if we were to invert this pyramid? What if to the Fey, creativity, self-fulfillment, respect are as important as food and safety are to us? Deprived of status or art, a Fey is as desperate as we would be if we were in the middle of the desert without any water, and the Fey will act accordingly. The naturalist Fey finds joy, fulfillment in this one place in the world, this one tree. They need, not want, to feel sunlight on the leaves, the cold sleep of winter, the new life of spring. And if you threaten to take that away from them, you might as well be threatening to suffocate them. The second most important thing in this inverted pyramid of Fey needs is recognition and self-respect. If you think about all the stories of Fey and mortal meeting and that going horribly wrong, it is almost always because, at least from the Fey's perspective, the mortal did not give them their due consideration. While mortals may risk life and limb to feed their aching belly, Fey will do so to feed their aching pride, for status. Tatan and Oberon inspire poets because they need to feel that they've been honored. Baba Yaga and Mab are sometimes helpful to mortals, but only if those mortals have paid them the respect that they're due. But if you cross them, they will go to outrageous lengths to ruin you and everything that has ever been connected to you to soothe that aching pride. When your players are in-game talking with this Fey, decide what you think it is that this Fey cares about. Is it this tree, this lake, their pride, creativity, music, art, something like that? And then remember, it is life and death to this Fey in the way it is not for the mortal. Sure, the Dwarven Thane would care about their pride, but it is not life and death to the Dwarven Thane. Yes, dwarves can be prickly about their pride, but if you injure a dwarf's pride, you have time to apologize, make amends, because as prickly as a dwarf may be, injuring their pride is not holding a knife to the dwarf's throat. To the Fey, injuring their pride is worse, unless this knife is actually like cold iron, which is not the same as steel. They're not going to be this worried about a knife, but that's a whole thing about mechanics. Whatever the Fey cares about should be something that's going to come up in that adventure so the players have a chance to either hit that note or totally miss it and piss off the Fey. If the players do strike that note, treat it as a person who has not eaten in a day. Or if they're ticking off the Fey, remember that to the Fey, it's the same as if they just shot a gun in the Fey's direction. Maybe it never comes up, and that's fine. So long as the players are aware that they dodged the proverbial bullet, they will feel like they did something impressive by merely escaping unscathed. And the players will need to know there were risks. If they don't know that certain kinds of fairies care about certain kinds of flowers, then when they blow up the pixie's field of foxgloves, they may be really confused when the pixie leads them into a bog and abandons them there. I think you should tell the players outright that this is a Fey creature and that they are dangerous. They don't share your priorities. You don't have to tell them everything, just tell them. Telegraph. This is not normal. And if you're not going to do that, then fair enough. I think you should at least then call for a roll, insight or nature, so that the character has a chance to notice that something is wrong, that they are walking into danger. Even if they don't successfully make that roll, just the act of rolling the dice hints to the players there is risk here, because dealing with the Fey is risky. This is where any creature really starts to come alive, where they feel like they exist on their own terms. The Fey care about what we care about. Art, emotion, nature, reputation, but in a completely different order. Humans will attack the Fey for survival. Food, water, shelter, and air. But the Fey will break the mortals to feel something. That's what makes them work, makes them feel like Fey. It's not the wings, the antlers, or the flowers. That's the set dressing that allows one of our players to understand, hopefully, what they're looking at. But the priorities are what makes them feel like you're having a conversation with Mab, Baba Yaga, Titania. They are close enough. We share the same wants and needs that we think we understand them until we realize we mistook a need for a want, and we are not the same. Thank you very much to Ginny and Pointy Hat for putting together Monster Week. If you enjoyed this video, then there's a level 17 adventure down the doobly-doo about a cursed archfey that is sleeping in a theater. You may recognize that from this video. Until next time, Dungeon Masters, remember, you're a player too. Try to have some fun. Want down? You just got up, and you just, like, ew. Like, you just... Which do you want? Where are we going with this?